Greetings and welcome to Writers on Writing. I am your host, Dr. Brenda Greene, Executive Director and founder of the Center for Black Literature, Director of the National Black Writers Conference, and Professor of English here at Medgar Evers College. This radio program is paid for by Medgar Evers College. I am so pleased to have with me today the writer, Dolen Perkins-Valdez. Welcome. Professor
Hello.
Valdez, or Dolen, or what should we call?
Please call me Dolen.
Okay, so welcome so much.
Thank you.
Writers on Writing comes to you every Sunday and gives our listening audience an opportunity to hear writers from the African diaspora talk about their work, their lives, and their craft. And Dolen has written a gripping book that's really, I guess you could call it historical narrative. It's not really fiction, but it is a book that I had difficulty putting down. Take My Hand, Take My Hand. And in her book, Wench, she explored the trauma and what Black people went through around slavery, the moral dimensions and abuses during slavery. But here she goes to another level and explores the moral abuses of the Black bodies of women. And so, as I said, it's a very gripping story. It's very timely now, and it's history we should know. But I just like to begin by giving some background information about Dolen Perkins-Valdez. She's the author of the New York Times bestselling novel, Wench. She was a finalist for 2 NAACP Image Awards and the Hurston-Wright Legacy Award for fiction for her novel, Wench. And she was awarded the first novelist award by the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. Dolen also received a DC commission on the arts grant, and she also wrote the introduction to Solomon Northup's 12 Years of Slave. She is currently the current chair of the Faulkner Foundation, and she is very, very active in the schools. And I understand you are no longer teaching, but you're focused on your writing now. She's formerly associate.
Oh no, I'm still teaching.
Okay, you are. Okay.
Yeah, I'm still teaching.
You're at American University.
That's right. I'm at American.
And this is one of the excerpts I found in reviewing and preparing for this excerpt by Tina McElroy Ensa. And I thought it really symbolizes and illustrates what you did in this book. In a perfectly orchestrated symphony of specificity, nuance, Jim Crow history, and memory, Perkins-Valdez brings the events and images of Montgomery 1973 whizzing back like an unscheduled train rushing past a platform. As always, the author has clearly spent a great deal of time researching to ensure depth and accuracy. And so, Take My Hand, she calls the article, exposes a dark episode in American history. So I've given some information, but I'd like to begin by you giving our listening audience and our viewing audience your motivation for writing this book and a brief synopsis of what this book tells us.
Sure. So I was motivated to write this book because it hadn't been written yet. It needed to be written. I was really surprised that nobody had written about this case before. And I knew that I had to make it into my own story. So it's inspired by the actual case, but I bring my own perspective to it, which is me asking a question that I can't get answered in the archives. And that question for this book is, what would it have been like to be a nurse, a Black woman working at that federal family planning clinic at this time and have 2 little girls sterilized under your watch? How do you live with that? how do you make sense of that? That was my question. And that's sort of the leading motivator for this book.
So in telling that story, you really touch on so many themes, not only the brutality and the horror of having two Black girls sterilized, but you talk about mother-daughter relationships. You explore the issues that the central character, Sybil Townsend is dealing with. You look at abuse in a number of ways. And I think ultimately this book on many levels is about the search for love. Would you comment on any of those things that did you deliberately think about, or did they just naturally emerge in the book?
That's a really good question, Dr. Greene. I have to say that one of the things writing this book taught me, so, you know, in academic circles and in our university environments, we often talk about intersectionality, and we talk about the multiple layers of identity of, you know, people of color, queer people, disabled people. But with this book, I learned that you really can't talk about Black women's experience in this country without automatically moving into intersectionality. And so any book to me now that doesn't engage on all those different levels is missing some of the facets of our experiences. And so it just emerged naturally that to talk about Black women and Black women's bodies, we also have to talk about class. To talk about Black women and Black women's bodies, we also have to talk about disabled bodies. To talk about our bodies, we also have to talk about privilege, and we have to talk about public policy, and we have to think about what has happened to us in relation to what has happened to Black men. So we're thinking about gender. So I think that as I wrote the book, it just became clearer and clearer to me. I didn't plan it. And sometimes now when people tell me that it touches on this particular issue, I wouldn't say that it surprises me, but I say to myself, gosh, had I known that, you know, I was dealing with all those different layers of our experiences while I was writing the book, or had I been very conscious of it, I never could have done it, because it probably would have paralyzed me to think like, oh, you have to write about all these different things at once. So I didn't consciously do it, but I recognize as, you know, people read it, and I recognize even as I finished the manuscript, I said to myself, gosh, this was a really complicated story.
Yes. What was that research process like? What did you read in order to prepare to write this book?
Well, I started with Dorothy Roberts' Killing the Black Body. I needed at first to learn everything I could about the case and about the history of reproductive injustice. I read Harriet Washington's Medical Apartheid. I, you know, read books about you know, the law and how, you know, I had like the federal rules of civil procedure so that I could try to get the court case right. I read lots of newspapers from the time. I even went back and reread A Mercy by Toni Morrison because, you know, she touches on this issue. So what I try to do is I try to get just enough going so that I can get the manuscript started. And then once I get the manuscript started, as questions arise, I go back and look more specifically for answers to my questions.
Okay, so you're a scholar and also creative writer. This ends up being a novel. How did you address making this into a form that was, I think, much more accessible to a larger audience? You're bringing up these issues in the novelistic form, bringing them up is making them more accessible to a wider audience and really zeroing in on the issue. So how did you go about, I guess what I'm asking is, what was your process turning this very, very real, troubling narrative in our history, this troubling phase, and we can foresee that there may be remnants of it coming coming to us in the future. How did you go about constructing this into fiction? What's that process like?
Well, first of all, like real life is just too unbelievable. Right. So I feel like to translate it into fiction is to make it into a story that really people can wrap their heads around. I mean, I feel like if you were to go into the historical archive and look at this case, it's mind-boggling. I mean, if you were to go into the archives and look at the Tuskegee syphilis experiment,
yes,
and what they did over 4 decades, it's like a horror story. It's just hard to even wrap your mind around it. And so part of what any artist has to do when you're translating something that actually happened into a cohesive story is you have to figure out what is your window into that story, because someone else could take the same case and write a completely different book.
yes.
So for me, my window was those nurses. I was just very, very curious about them. I'm still curious about them. I never was able to find any of those nurses, but I know that I need, I guess you could call it an angle, but I need a way in that's going to allow me to get some of my questions answered. And I've learned that by me doing that, I also make it accessible for the reader. It gives them a window into. So I open this window here at the clinic where the nurses work, and I say to the reader, hey, climb in this window with me and let's see what happened. Let's follow this one nurse, Sybil Townsend. So for me, accessibility has to do with a singularity of vision. And I feel that my books really work in that way best when I have a single question that I'm really trying to address. And my work is probably less successful when I have multiple questions going on. But, it is very important to me. Accessibility is very important to me. In the same way, and, just to speak sort of on a scholarly level, it was very important to early Black American writers who were writing from maybe a little bit more of a sociological vantage point, because literature had to have some kind of political end for many of the early Black writers. And I feel that I am in that lineage of carrying on the kinds of work that early Black American writers were doing.
Early, and even I think about what Bell Hooks talked about, making sure that her essays that she wrote on feminism were accessible to the public. She did not want to just write to the scholarly, the academic audience. She wanted to make sure the community of women understood that. Yeah.
Yes, and you can get into tricky waters there because you always want to speak to your best and brightest, right? And we know that Black readers, and definitely Black women readers, are very smart. But I think about my Black women readers in the sense that they are very, very honest readers. And so if I am not authentic or sincere, my readers will call me out on it, right? Like, they are not, ashamed to send me a note and say, I don't like that. Like one of my friends, she called me and she said, my mom is mad at you over this one thing in the book. And I'm like, okay, I know moms get mad at me sometimes. So I say that to say that for me, that kind of accessibility equates to honesty.
Yes.
Right? Rather than any kind of like form. But having said that, I think if we're talking about this conversation of reproductive justice, the women who need to be at the center of that conversation are not academics, are not middle-class Black women or middle-class white women with resources. We need to keep front and center women who are going to be most affected by this policy, by what's about to happen at the courts. We can't just continue speaking for people. We need to, I want to turn on the news and I want to see a young woman who's struggling, who's chosen to terminate a pregnancy or chosen to use contraceptives or chosen to use, a clinic for their gynecological needs, who says, this is going to affect me. And this is why I think that this is problematic. Like, I want to see that young woman.
Right. You want to see that young woman, but also you're speaking to the need for call for action. Because what do you think will swing the pendulum? Or can it be swung? What do you foresee happening? Can we turn this around in this climate, the Roe versus Wade? Can we get people to come out and really, really show that this, as we have done and must do with the whole gun violence, can we turn this around and mobilize people? Can we really create a major movement again around this? Your thoughts?
Well, I wouldn't be here talking with you right now. I wouldn't be still writing. And I hear from readers, so many readers, who are really moved by this story, who say they didn't know this, who it's, they've just been introduced to the term reproductive justice, coined by Black feminists at a conference in 1994. They may have heard the term and they didn't know Black women came up with it, or maybe they've never heard the term, or maybe they heard the term and didn't know what it meant. So I believe there's still work to be done on the ground. I don't know if we're going to be able to turn this ship around. It's a very, very big ship.
Yes.
And it's a very, very powerful ship. But I can say that there are a lot of people out there who are concerned. And I think there's power in collective voices and what you say call to actions. I think there's power in that. And we've, like you say, we've done it before.
Yes.
We've moved that very powerful ship before. Do I think we'll be able to turn it around quickly? No. And so, I talk a lot to like my teenager. I have a teenage daughter, because she's going to eventually have to enter this fight. So this is also something we have to prepare this next generation for. It's not going to be a quick fight. It's going to be a long fight.
Right. So I definitely agree with you, but just going back to that, to your writing of this very, very important book, what was a highlight and what was a challenge for you in writing this?
Well, I would say a highlight was being in the 1970s, because I love the 1970s and I'm a child of the 1970s. And so I enjoyed, while I was writing, I was listening to 70s music, particularly early 70s, because you're still sort of before, disco really comes in. So it's like early 70s music. I'm listening to like Gladys Knight and the Pips and Booker T and the MGs.
Yes, yes.
And it was just wonderful.
Relate to that.
Yes. And, I'm originally from Memphis, so I really love all of the old Stax music. But I also enjoy just like researching about Alabama, Montgomery. I think Montgomery, Alabama in particular has such rich history. As you know, it has the most civil rights sites, national monuments than any other city in the country. And so it's just, to me, a fascinating city. Even today, I'm fascinated by Montgomery. I would say what was challenging for me was knowing that I only had one shot to get it right. And that's why the book took me so long. I really wanted to try to get it right. I really wanted to do justice by these girls. I really wanted to do the case justice. I had early readers who read it for me. I went over it and over and over it. My agent read it multiple times. I did not rush it. And so that was a little bit difficult because, when I started this book, this was 3 Supreme Court justices ago. I didn't know that we would be where we are now. But as I was writing it, I saw the court moving. And I also saw all kinds of other things happening just in the news around Black women. So I began to feel more urgent, like I have to finish it. But at the same time, I was like, I don't want to rush it. I'm not trying to be topical or trendy. I need to get it right. So that tension for me was difficult.
And how long did it take you?
Well, it took me about 5 years, 7 years total between books. So it was about 5 years. And then, of course, like the publication process takes a little while.
Right. So this is a good segue into those who want to do historical fiction and talking about craft. What message would you have for those who want to do more work in this genre? It's one of my favorite genres.
Me too. I think more people need to write in this genre. And I don't just mean, trying to write like Colson Whitehead and win a Pulitzer Prize. I mean, it's fine to write in a more commercial historical fiction vein too. There's so many stories that need to be told. And there's so many readers out there hungry for our stories. And, I see so many different things in the archives and I think, oh, that would make a great book. I have 20 ideas for 20 books. So many interesting people. Someone was just asking me about Fannie Lou Hamer and the term she came up with, Mississippi appendectomy, after she was given a hysterectomy without her consent in 1964. And I was, answering the question via email. And I was thinking, man, I don't know if somebody's written a book about Fannie, but she's fascinating.
Right.
And
They've got films, there have been documentaries of her.
Films, documentaries. I'm not sure. Maybe there's been a middle grade novel about her or something, but I feel like somebody ought to write like a big novel about her because she's brilliant. She's fearless. She refuses to leave Mississippi, in these very, very turbulent times. And then she dies at 59, so young, but she was such a bright, burning light. And I'd love to see a novel, like a biographical novel or something.
So as we come to a close, tell us about you a little bit. How did you get into writing? You're a scholar and a creative, right? Tell us about your background. What motivated you? How did you choose this life of the writer, activist, scholar?
It's so interesting. I've never really thought about myself as an activist, but I do feel that
the work you do is in the tradition of activism.
I'm starting to realize that, that was not something I've really admitted to myself, but I am starting to realize that. I think, so the question is, because I'm thinking about what you said, but what do I suggest for people who want to go into this genre?
Yes. So what do you suggest? And I wanted to hear a little bit more about how you got into it.
How I got into it. Okay.
Yes, how you got into it. When did you start writing?
Well, I was always a reader. And I think, most writers do start out as readers, I hope. But I didn't know about it as a profession because I didn't know any writers. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, which was and is a majority Black city. But the class of Black professionals there didn't include novelists, really. And you may meet a poet, someone like Arthur Flowers, who's a wonderful poet.
Yes.
Writer, right? But it wasn't common. And so once I graduated college, I began to meet living writers, and who told me that this was something that I could do. But before that, I wanted to be a lawyer for a long time. And that was what you did in my community when you were smart and you knew how to read and write. You became a lawyer. And if you were good in the sciences, you became a doctor. Those were the two sort of.
Okay, that was a little bit, right. For teacher, then lawyer, doctor. Yeah. Yes, okay.
That's right. And I did become a teacher. My mother says to this day, you're a teacher. And, like in her mind, there's a higher profession. Right. And I have a little pillow in my living room that says teachers touch the future. And every now and then somebody will come over and say, oh, who's the teacher? And I'm like, me.
Yeah. You have.
They don't think of professors as teachers.
Yes, I know. And many people do not understand the distinction,
Yeah, I know.
But usually, like you said, that is our first love.
My first love is being a teacher. Yeah.
Yes, I knew I wanted to be a teacher at 5 years old.
You did?
Yes. I used to play school.
I was just about to say, did you play school? Did you have a little chalkboard?
Yes. Yes. Okay, so next project?
Next project is not ready to talk about yet because it's still a mess of pages, but I am working on something, and it is another historical novel.
Okay, and I can definitely see this as a film. I don't know if you've been approached yet, or even if you can share that, but I definitely can
I have
see.
not been approached. No, so I'm open to anybody listening
Okay,
today.
so our listening audience, our viewers,
Yeah.
you're out there, let's get the word out. So I want to remind you to go out and purchase Take My Hand, a novel by Dolen Perkins-Valdez. I've told everyone about it. People are agreeing with me. Once they pick it up, they're having difficulty putting it down. So I thank you for doing this work. I thank you for talking with us on Writers on Writing. And I want to remind our listening audience that the writer is always reading, the reader is always writing. Keep reading and writing, empower yourselves as readers and writers. And thank you so much, Dolen Perkins-Valdez, for the work you do. And we're looking forward to your next novel. And as I said, perhaps, some films. Both books, Wench and Take My Hand, are just really stirring books.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You've been listening to Writers on Writing, and this program is paid for by Medgar Evers College Radio. Thank you, and come back next week.